People in Boston's biomedical world spoke about Everett Slade the way they spoke about weather systems, with a mixture of respect and quiet resignation, knowing that whatever he decided to do would happen regardless of whether you were prepared for it. At 34, he controlled Slade Biomedical with the kind of absolute authority that other CEOs spent entire careers trying to buy. He was 6'2" of calculated restraint in bespoke charcoal suits, with dark eyes that processed a room in the time it took most people to shake hands. He was striking in the way that certain architecture is striking, intentional, precise, and not designed for comfort. He had turned away women from pharmaceutical dynasties, venture capital firms, and research partnerships with the same ease he dismissed quarterly projections he didn't trust. Not from indifference, but because he had learned at great personal cost that warmth was the one thing in his world that bled. The single exception to his complete personal armor was an object nobody outside his innermost circle knew existed, a slim platinum medical ID bracelet, the kind hospital manufactured for emergency contact purposes, but this one custom fabricated, the metal nearly 3 millimeters thick, the weight of something built to last a lifetime, engraved on the face, Lydia Slade, his sister, gone 3 years from a rare autoimmune condition that the medical world had no framework to treat. On the inner band, in characters so small they required a jeweler's loupe to read, a 16-digit encryption key, the access code to Slade Biomedical's offline research archive. 3 years of irreplaceable gene therapy trial data, stored on an air-gapped server as protection against the corporate espionage that had become a regular feature of his industry. The data represented a potential path toward the treatment that had never come in time for Lydia. Everett wore the bracelet under his cuff at every board meeting. It was the only personal item he never removed. Until a November Thursday at a charity gala at the Four Seasons, Boston, when the clasp snapped in a stairwell fight he hadn't planned for, and by the time his team swept the parking structure, the bracelet was gone. The men had been employed by Harwick Group, a rival biotech entity that had been circling Slade's research division for 18 months. They weren't trying to kill him. They were sending a message about negotiating terms. Everett delivered a different message back with his head of security, and the encounter was over in under 4 minutes. He didn't notice the loss until he was in the car, pulling onto Boylston, reaching to straighten his cuff and finding nothing beneath it. By the time his team returned to the structure, it had been 5 hours. The bracelet was not there. Neve Whitmore had been on her feet for 11 hours when she found it. She was 27, an ER nurse at Boston Medical Center, and she had been working a medical support rotation at the gala venue. The hospital provided on-site staff at large charity events as a liability measure, unglamorous work that paid an additional differential she needed for her brother's textbook expenses. She'd volunteered without hesitating. She always volunteered for the shifts other people declined, which was either admirable or a form of slow self-destruction depending on the week. Neve was not extraordinary by most standard measures. She drove a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard. She made slightly over $50,000 a year before taxes. She kept her dark hair pinned up for every shift because the hospital was 62 degrees, and she'd learned not to waste warmth on things she couldn't control. She owed more in student loan debt than she'd earned in the last 2 years combined, a number she had stopped looking at directly the way you learned not to look at certain things if you wanted to keep functioning. What she had, what no performance review had ever found a box to check for, was a different kind of eye. She noticed things before the monitors did, the slight cyanotic tinge in a patient's nail beds before the oxygen alarm triggered, the irregular flutter in someone's breathing pattern 3 curtains down. She had caught 3 cases that month that would have been missed and had been thanked for exactly none of them, because that was how the profession worked. She had accepted this a long time ago and kept doing it anyway. It was this same eye that caught the glint near the storm drain, on level 2 of the parking structure at 1:17 in the morning. She had parked there. She was tired in the bone-deep way that made everything feel slightly underwater. She almost walked past. Instead, something pulled her gaze down, the way it always did when something was wrong, and she crouched and picked up a slim piece of metal from the edge of the drain grate. A medical ID bracelet, heavy, custom. The platinum caught the overhead light with the dull certainty of expensive things, a woman's name engraved on the face. On the inner band, tiny text very precise, numbers and letters that meant nothing to her in the dark. She slipped it into her jacket pocket to turn in at the hospital, lost and found in the morning. She forgot about it until she was home, changing out of her scrubs, and it fell onto her bathroom tile with a sound too solid for something so small. She brought it the next afternoon to Leo at his repair shop on Washington Street because Leo knew metal and because he asked fewer questions than most people. He was 60, wore the same green eyeshade every day, and had once appraised a piece of estate jewelry for her without commenting on why she had it. He put the bracelet under his loupe for approximately 9 seconds. Then he set it down on the counter and pushed it back toward her without touching it further. "Where did you get this?" His voice had gone very flat. "Found it. Parking structure near the Four Seasons after an event." "You found it?" "That's what I said." Leo removed his eyeshade and looked at her directly, not at the bracelet, at her, Neve. "That is a Slade piece. The fabrication style, the metal weight, the engraving tolerance. This was commissioned through Harrington's on Newbury Street. They make 5, maybe 6 pieces a year at this specification, and only for people with a very specific kind of money." He folded his hands on the glass. "Everett Slade. Slade Biomedical. Do you read the business section?" She did not read the business section. "I cannot appraise this," Leo said carefully. "I will not appraise this. If the wrong people learn you have it, it doesn't matter that you're a nurse who found it in a parking garage. It doesn't matter that you're standing here explaining yourself to me right now. There are people looking for that bracelet who will not take time to listen to context." He stood. "Return it." Directly to Slade. To no one else. Neve picked the bracelet up off the glass counter. She could feel Leo watching her walk out. She stood on Washington Street in the November wind and held the bracelet in both hands. She could address an envelope to Slade Biomedical and drop it in a mailbox. She could leave it at the Four Seasons front desk. She could throw it in the Charles River right now and no one would ever physically connect her to it. But Leo had seen her face, and if Everett Slade had resources enough to commission private platinum jewelry, he had resources enough to pull every camera in that parking structure. If her face was already in a file somewhere, and she was nearly certain it was, then an anonymous drop would only raise more questions than it answered. She had to be the one standing in front of him when it changed hands. No ambiguity, no inference, just the direct, uncomplicated truth. She gave herself 30 seconds to consider other options. Then she got in the Civic and drove to the Slade Biomedical Tower in the seaport. The lobby security turned her away twice. The third time she held the bracelet up to the camera above the front desk without saying a word. 7 minutes later, she was in an elevator she hadn't pressed a button in, ascending to a floor the building directory didn't list. The office that appeared when the doors opened occupied the entire north side of the building. Floor-to-ceiling glass facing the harbor, the kind of space that communicated power the way other spaces communicated comfort, deliberately without apology. A desk that would have required 3 people to move, a single chair beside the window, positioned to face outward, not inward, because the person who used it preferred to look at what was happening, rather than at the room behind them. Everett Slade was standing at the glass when she was shown in. He turned, and Neve registered him the way she registered everyone who entered her clinical space. Posture, skin tone, the set of the jaw, the quality of the breathing. He was composed. He was running on insufficient sleep, probably 36 hours of it. There was tension in the muscles along his jaw that had been there long enough to become habitual, and his eyes, when they found her, were the particular shade of grey that certain winter skies were. The kind that made you recalibrate your plans. He took her in with one measured look, the unzipped parka over her off-shift clothes, the hospital badge she'd forgotten to remove, still clipped to her pocket, the boots that had needed replacing 6 months ago and hadn't been replaced because something else always needed the money more, the total absence of any performance of significance. He had spent 48 hours deploying resources across the city. He had expected a thief with a ransom number. He had expected a Harwick operative running a leverage strategy. He had not expected this. "My people tell me you have something of mine," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Measured in the way that things are measured when they have been carefully controlled for a very long time. Neve stepped forward and placed the bracelet on the edge of his desk. "I found it near the drain on level 2 of the parking structure beside the Four Seasons, Thursday night, just after 1 in the morning. I didn't know whose it was until I had it looked at yesterday morning." She kept her voice level. "I came as soon as I understood." He stepped to the desk. He didn't reach for it immediately. His eyes stayed on her. "You took it to an appraiser." "A jeweler on Washington Street. He identified the style and declined to appraise it. He told me to bring it directly to you. And between Thursday and yesterday, it was in my jacket pocket. I thought it was a lost patient item from the event." She met his gaze. "I was going to turn it in at the hospital." Everett Slade picked up the bracelet. He ran his thumb across the engraved name on the face, slow and deliberate, the way you touched something you had not been certain you would hold again. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness exactly, but a fracture in the precision of it. He turned the bracelet and checked the inner band. His shoulders released a fraction of an inch. She caught it because she was trained to catch things like that. He looked back at her. "You could have sold this." "I know." "The platinum value alone." "I know what platinum trades at," Neve said. "That's not why I'm here." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she suspected his face had produced in some time. "Then why are you here?" "To return what isn't mine and go home. I have a shift in 4 hours." He held her gaze for a long moment, and she had the disorienting sensation of being read. Not assessed for threat or value, but actually read, the way she read patience, searching for what was real beneath what was presented. "Sit down," he said. "I don't need to." "Miss Whitmore," he said her name, which confirmed his team had already pulled her ID from the building's camera log. "Please." Something in the word made her sit. He pulled a tablet from his desk and turned it toward her, a still frame from a parking structure camera. Timestamp, Thursday, 2:04 a.m. 2 men in the level 2 stairwell, one of them holding a phone with a photo on the screen. The photo showed a figure in scrubs, crouched near the drain. Her. "Harwick Group's recovery team arrived at the structure approximately an hour after you did," Everett said. His tone clinical in the way that people's voices went clinical when they were managing something larger than the words. "They found the bracelet gone. They pulled the same camera footage I pulled. They have a clear image of your face." He set the tablet down. "They don't know your name yet. My intelligence team estimates 24 to 48 hours before they run the footage against public databases." Neve looked at the image. The woman in the photo, crouched on cold concrete, entirely unaware of what she was holding, entirely unaware of what would follow. "I returned it," she said. Her voice stayed level, but she could feel the evenness starting to cost her something. "I did the right thing. I brought it straight back." "Yes," Everett said quietly, "and it won't matter to them." The room was very still. Below the glass, the city moved through its ordinary Friday afternoon, indifferent to what was being decided 34 floors up. "I have a brother," Neve said. "He's 20, he's in college, he can't. He's safe, he's on a secured campus. He is not who they'll go to first." A pause. "You are?" "Then what am I supposed to do?" Her composure held, but only just. He looked at her for a moment that was longer than it measured. "You stay here, tonight, until my security team resolves the Harwick situation." I am not staying with someone I met 15 minutes ago." "You are," he said, not unkindly, with the certainty of someone who had already run every alternative and found them insufficient. "You walked into my building holding the only thing in my life that matters to me. That puts you inside this situation whether you leave or stay. Leaving just means you're inside it without protection." He held her gaze steadily. "You did the right thing today, Miss Whitmore. The least I can do is make sure it doesn't cost you everything." The suite she was given occupied the residential level of the building, a floor maintained for extended security situations. It was the size of her entire apartment building's ground floor. White roses in crystal she was afraid to breathe near. A bathroom with a heated floor she stood on for 5 minutes, trying to decide if she felt guilty about it. She decided she did. She used it anyway. For 2 days, Everett Slade was a presence she knew only by inference. The sound of low voices in a corridor, the slightly altered posture of security staff whenever he was nearby. She glimpsed him once across the common area on the second morning. Dark suit, no tie, a stack of documents under his arm, moving with the contained energy of someone managing 17 things at once, and keeping them all below a certain temperature. His eyes found her for exactly 2 seconds, then he moved on. The third morning, Neve commandeered the kitchen. She had eaten 2 days of catered food that was beautiful and completely wrong. Precise portions of things that tasted like effort rather than sustenance, designed to impress rather than feed. She found the kitchen, found a refrigerator stocked with groceries nobody was using, and started making actual soup, whatever she found. Carrots, half a can of white beans, a bunch of thyme that was still mostly good. The kind of thing her mother used to make when someone needed to be restored rather than impressed. She was ladling it into a bowl when she registered him in the doorway. Sleeves pushed to the elbows, no jacket. He looked for the first time like a person who lived somewhere rather than a position that occupied space. "I found your kitchen," Neve said. "I see that. I can make enough for 2 if that's useful." He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he was going to decline. Then he pulled out a stool on the other side of the island and sat down. They talked for 3 hours. Not about Harwick, not about security timelines. He asked about her work with the particular attention of someone who was genuinely curious, rather than filling a silence, and she found herself describing cases the way she never got to outside of hospital corridors. The complexity of triage decisions, the strange intimacy of being the person who kept someone stable long enough for everything else to happen, the cases that stayed with her, and the ones she had learned to set down before they followed her home. He told her about Lydia. He didn't seem to plan to. It began with her asking, very quietly, whose name was engraved on the bracelet, and then it kept going, past midnight, past the soup going cold, into a quiet that was not uncomfortable. "She said nurses were the ones who actually kept people alive," Everett said. "Doctors diagnosed and surgeons fixed, but nurses were the ones holding the situation together in between." She was 22 when she said it. She was about to start her 3rd year of pre-med. His voice was even, carefully so. She would have been a very good doctor. Neve looked at him across the kitchen island. She was right. "I know," he said, and something along his jaw went quiet that had been tight since she'd first seen him. On the 4th day, a file appeared beside her coffee. She recognized it for what it was before she opened it. The weight, the Slade Biomedical Security logo on the cover. She opened it without speaking. "Security protocol," Everett said from across the room. "Done when you arrived. I needed to confirm you weren't a Harwick operative running a long recovery play." Neve turned pages. Her employment history, her address in Dorchester, her brother's enrollment at BU, pre-med track, 2nd year, and then the financial summary, the student loan balance she'd stopped looking at. The credit card she'd been servicing at minimum payment for 26 months. The life insurance settlement from her parents' accident, the one that had covered exactly 1 year of tuition before it was gone. She closed the file. "His remaining tuition," Everett said carefully. 6 semesters. A foundation grant has been applied. It's fully funded. Neve stood. No. The application. No. She looked at him with the directness she used when she needed a patient to understand she wasn't offering options. I didn't return that bracelet to be compensated. I didn't do it for leverage or goodwill or anything you can repay. I did it because I found something that wasn't mine and I gave it back. She set the file down on the counter. That is not a transaction. Don't treat it like one. Everett set down what he was holding and crossed the room. He stopped closer to her than he'd stood before, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the evidence of years of decisions made under difficult light. In my world, he said quietly, everything is a transaction. Loyalty is maintained through leverage or fear. Trust is purchased. I have operated this way for so long that I have forgotten how to recognize anything else. The words were even, but something underneath them wasn't. You walked into this building holding the only object I have kept with me every day for 3 years. You could have sold it. You could have held it for exactly the leverage it represented. Instead, you put it on a desk and asked for nothing but to be left alone. His hand came up, slowly, with the careful hesitation of a man who had trained himself not to reach for things, and his knuckles brushed her cheekbone, once so lightly it might have been accidental. It was not accidental. The grant isn't payment, he said. It is the only thing I know how to do when someone gives me back something I thought was lost. Neve looked at him. 3 years of keeping himself at the exact perimeter of everything. The coldest man in Boston's biomedical world, standing 6 inches from her in a kitchen at 4 in the afternoon, his hand barely touching her face like it was made of something that could break. What was lost, she asked quietly. He didn't answer, but he didn't move away. The attack came at 2 a.m., 7 days after she'd arrived. A winter storm had been moving in off the Atlantic all evening, sleet against the glass, wind that masked sound and erased clean edges. She was reading in her room when the building's PA system pulsed a tone she didn't recognize. Brief, low, then absolute silence. The side door to her suite opened 30 seconds later. Everett was in dark clothes, moving with the focused efficiency she recognized from the ER when a physician was coding someone and not panicking, because panic would end the situation faster than anything else. He had the look of someone already 3 steps into a plan. Service corridor, he said. Stay close. Neve got her shoes on in under 15 seconds, which was faster than most people managed with full comprehension of what was happening. She'd learned in trauma nursing that comprehension was optional. Movement was not. The building's infrastructure level was reached by a maintenance elevator, requiring a physical key. He kept her behind him in the corridor, and twice she heard sounds from other parts of the building, controlled, purposeful sounds that she did not let herself fully process, and twice Everett changed their route without explaining why, and she followed because she understood clinical decisions made in motion. The safe room door opened on his palm scan. They were inside and sealed before the sequence had fully registered. Concrete walls, security feeds on monitors, cold, very quiet, the particular silence of a room that was designed to hold whatever was put inside it. Neve turned to assess him, because that was what she did first when a crisis stopped moving. She saw the blood before he said anything. "Take your shirt off," she said. "It's a graze." "Off." He looked at her for a moment, then he did. She was already at the trauma cabinet. The wound was along the left side of his ribs, a knife graze. Painful, requiring closure, not immediately threatening to anything vital. She had seen worse in the first 20 minutes of a Saturday night. She cleaned it, packed it, and began closures with what the kit had available, keeping her hands steady the way she'd trained herself to keep her hands steady, by locating the clinical task and living inside it. "You're not flinching," Everett said. He was watching her work with the focused disorientation of a man encountering something he didn't have a category for. "I'm an nurse." She pressed the last closure flat. "I've held people together in circumstances considerably worse than this." That's not what I meant. She looked up at him. Most people, he said quietly, in this situation they fall apart, or they perform not falling apart, which is its own kind of falling apart. You're just, he paused, working. Someone needed to. She sat back. Your team? Handling it. Backup was already staged. Harwick overcommitted personnel, expecting it to take longer. He exhaled slowly, the first unguarded breath she'd heard from him. It's almost resolved. Outside the sealed door, the sounds of the building gradually changed, from purposeful movement to the quieter sounds of a situation being contained, then concluded. She could read it the same way she read an ER floor. The rhythm of a crisis when it peaks and when it begins, finally to release. Everett leaned back against the wall. His eyes were on her, and the careful calculation that normally occupied them was gone, replaced by something rawer. The expression of a man looking at something he has been trying not to look at directly. I have built every wall in my life deliberately, he said. After Lydia, I decided I would not give anyone sufficient proximity to become leverage. I would not have an exposed side. His voice was quiet, entirely without performance. I have not let anyone pass the perimeter in 3 years, and you, a pause. You have been inside it since the second evening, and I cannot determine how or when that happened. Neve was still. His pulse was visible at his throat, faster than baseline, settling. She had been tracking it without deciding to. He reached into the inner pocket of the jacket folded beside him and removed the bracelet. She hadn't known he was carrying it. He held it for a moment, the platinum catching the emergency lighting, Lydia's name facing upward. Then he reached for her wrist. He turned it, palm up, and fastened the bracelet around it with the careful precision of someone who wanted to do it right. The metal was warm from his pocket. I'm not giving you the encryption key, he said. I know. But I haven't been able to put it back in the vault since you returned it. His thumb stayed over the clasp for a moment after it was secured, and she understood that the gesture was taking something from him to offer. It means something different than it did a week ago, and I think you already know why. Neve looked at the bracelet on her wrist, Lydia's name. The weight of 3 years of carrying it alone in the absence of anyone Everett Slade had trusted enough to let carry anything with him. She thought about soup at midnight and a man who had stood in a kitchen doorway like he needed to be invited into his own room. She thought about the way he'd said she would have been a very good doctor and the way the sentence had cost him something to complete. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was careful. The way you move toward something you wanted to be true, not just felt. He went completely still for half a second. The stillness of a man arriving at exactly what he had spent 3 years preventing, and then he kissed her back, and there was nothing calculated in it. His hand came up to the back of her neck, steady and certain, the way she recognized certainty, not as the absence of fear, but as the decision to move forward anyway. Outside the sealed door, the building settled back into something that was not quite silence, but was close to safety. His team was clearing the floors. The storm off the Atlantic was still driving sleet against glass somewhere far above them. And in a concrete room below a city that knew every detail of Everett Slade's professional life. And nothing whatsoever about the person underneath it, the man who had closed himself off after losing the last person he loved, finally let someone close enough to stay. Not because he had been worn down, not because his defenses had failed, but because she had returned something he thought was gone, and sitting across a kitchen island past midnight, he had realized the bracelet was only the beginning of the list.